As you should, Lindy. As you should. Boston's a great city. And, you should stop by Regina's Pizza in the North End, get yourself a pie well done, and thank me later. And same goes for any Sabres fans. If you're going to Boston, you should definitely go to Regina's Pizza.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian DeFelice.
Welcome into episode 32 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, we're going to recap Game 2 between the Boston Bruins and the Buffalo Sabres and look ahead to Game 3 and beyond. But first things first, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X at @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or leave a comment on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. The Boston Bruins and Buffalo Sabres are now tied at 1 game apiece, heading back to Boston for games 3 and 4. And it does feel rather appropriate that they are, because the Sabres were the better team in Game 1, and they got the win. The Bruins were the better team in Game 2, and they got the win. Buffalo was unable to capitalize on any potential carryover momentum from their comeback win in Game 1 and translate it into a Game 2 win and stranglehold on the series. And now, heading into Game 3, the Sabres have their fair share of question marks that we'll get to throughout the course of this episode. But we have to start with the Bruins and the adjustments and corrections that they made from Game 1 to Game 2 to draw themselves back to even in this series heading home. Last episode, we talked about how, especially in the later stages of the game while protecting a lead, the Bruins sat back and they played on their heels, and they stopped playing to win and they were playing not to lose. Well, in Game 2, that was not the case. The Bruins were aggressive, they were assertive, they were on their toes, and they were playing hungrier. And I know that they had the lead in Game 1 for much of regulation. I understand that. And we can give them a small, very small golf clap for doing so, because there is the argument that even though they weren't the better team statistically in Game 1, that going into a hostile environment on the road in Game 1, Buffalo's first home game in 15 years in the postseason, that weathering the storm and just being up on the scoreboard was good enough at that point in the game. And had the Bruins finished that game off, I think that argument is very fair. Like, teams win games all the time that statistically they weren't the better team in. But as history would now tell us, the Bruins did not finish that game strong, and they were bending all game, and they finally broke. And Buffalo deserves credit for that, because they were relentless. They didn't let the scoreboard get them down or get them nervous or tense. They forced Boston into mistakes. And Boston's mistakes were happening because they were having mental errors. And they were having mental errors because they were fatigued. And the Bruins were fatigued in Game 1 because they couldn't get the puck out of their own zone. Why? Because Buffalo's forecheck was relentless. And the Bruins were having a difficult time reacting to what Buffalo was doing. And the Bruins were not making decisions quick enough. And they were forcing pucks around the boards. They were rimming pucks around the boards. And Buffalo's defense were just licking their lips to cave in on whatever Bruins winger was flat-footed to keep that play alive in the offensive zone for Buffalo. And when Buffalo would overload the strong side and you'd see 3 or 4 blue jerseys, the Bruins defense were not quick enough to go D to D in reverse and go up the weak side. So ultimately in Game 1, the Bruins just spent too much time in their own zone that it took away from their energy and ability to effectively transition from defense to offense. And if and when they did get the puck to center ice and dump the puck in, they were too tired to aggressively go after it on the forecheck and regain possession of pucks, and therefore have enough offensive zone time and extended zone time to wear down the Sabres defense, to wear down the Sabres forwards, and make them tired from defending. The Bruins never got to that game in Game 1, despite having a lead on the scoreboard with 8 minutes to go in the game. Now, I know that was a mouthful, but in game 2, it was different. As I said, the Bruins, they did get to their forechecking game, but they also, and I'll talk about this a lot, but offense starts 200 feet from the net that you score on. You have to be able to transition from your own zone from defense to offense. Being able to break the puck out of your end consistently for all the reasons I just mentioned hurt the Bruins in game 1. It helps you. When you can break the puck out consistently, you're not defending as much. You're not as tired. You have more energy for neutral zone play and offensive zone play. And the Bruins did make those adjustments. One of the adjustments that they made in game 2 was that they stopped rimming pucks around the boards. They stopped making it easy for Buffalo's defense to pinch and telegraph where the play was going to go. It's a difficult play for a winger to corral and collect a hard rim around the boards. It's just difficult. It could take a funny bounce off your skate, off your stick. You're flat-footed. You're just hoping that you have close support, or that the opposition's defense is not pinching down and that you have a little bit more time than you think you do. So what are some ways to not rim the puck around and get the puck out of your zone? Well, you can try to use the high lob, which the Bruins did effectively in game 2. You can try to go indirect off the boards and out, which the Bruins did in game 2. You can obviously try to find your center swooping low with a tape-to-tape pass or a tape-to-tape pass to the winger. Or you can try to skate the puck out of trouble yourself. But the first 2 ways that I mentioned is what Boston did pretty effectively in game 2, which was they didn't rim pucks. They banked them off the boards and out, off the glass and out, and high lobs. And something else that they adjusted was the Bruins wingers were a little bit lower, which allowed a more convenient outlet pass for defense. And so when the wingers get a little bit lower in the D zone, it just makes it that much easier, that much more expedient for the defense to get the puck off their stick into a teammate, and then hopefully the center's swinging close by to support that winger. But you see this a lot with the Carolina Hurricanes and the Florida Panthers, and you see it with Buffalo and other teams around the league where you have very, very active defense, especially in the offensive zone for the opposition where you're trying to break the puck out. And in today's NHL, the players, they're too big, they're too fast, they're too skilled, they're too smart, that if a defenseman can telegraph where the puck's going on a breakout and they get the jump on that winger who's flat-footed, they'll pinch all day, every day, and they'll keep that puck in. And oftentimes it leads to a pretty good scoring chance, or at the very least, extended offensive zone time. Now, the defenseman doing that pinch has to make sure that they have a forward supporting them high to essentially take their place, so that if the defenseman does make a mistake or doesn't pinch effectively, that it's not an odd man rush the other way. But one way to maybe decentivize or detract an offensive defenseman from pinching down on the wall is, if you're that winger that's trying to get the puck out, maybe you go behind them. You get behind that defenseman and you go out into the neutral zone, because now you're a scoring threat. And that defenseman has to respect the fact that the winger that they're covering is now in a neutral zone. So what does that do? It drags them back to the neutral zone with you, therefore creating more time and space for the defensive players to now break the puck out. And you saw that happen on a couple of Boston's goals in game 2, starting with the first goal of the game, which was Jonathan Aspero electing to go with the high lob. And what that did was it backed Buffalo's defense out of the offensive zone to try to retrieve that loose puck. But Victor Arvidsson was aware of what Aspero was doing, and he sprung and he beat the Sabres defense to that loose puck and went in on Pekka Luukkonen and was able to get a pretty quick, nifty backhand shot off for a 5-hole goal that, if we're being honest, from a Buffalo perspective, you don't love that goal on the ice on the backhand. But nonetheless, it was a good play by the Bruins to go from defense to offense. Later on in the game, and we'll get to the Morgan Geekie goal later on, but you saw it with Victor Arvidsson's second goal of the game. First shift of the third period. Which for the second game in a row, by the way, the Bruins scored in their opening shift of the third period against Buffalo, who's been a very good third period team all year long. But first shift of the third period, it's 3-0 Boston, and Jonathan Aspero is deep in his own zone, goes hard off the boards, indirect. Casey Middlestad gets a tip on it, and from the weak side, Victor Arvidsson is sprinting across the neutral zone to collect that loose puck. Why? Because Matthias Samuelsson pinched, and he wasn't able to collect the pinch. It was an ineffective pinch, and now it's a 2-on-1 for the Bruins, and Arvidsson goes far side on Pekka Luukkonen, and now it's 4-0, just like that. So playoff hockey is all about a series of adjustments, right? Game to game, period to period. Both teams make them. I'm sure Buffalo is going to look at the film from game 2 and see how the Bruins were counteracting what Buffalo did well in game 1, and they'll try to have a counter reaction in game 3. It's the beauty of playoffs, and no matter who you're cheering for, where you're from, what your experience is playing hockey, watching hockey, whatever, the game within the game, the chess match that goes on in the postseason in the NHL is unlike anything else in sports. I mean, yeah, the MLB has lengthy series sometimes, and same with the NBA and football. Football is definitely a game of X's and O's, and that's a constant chess match within those 60 minutes. But there's something unique about the game-to-game adjustments in an NHL series that is just really fascinating to watch. So the Bruins made those necessary adjustments in their own zone in game 2, and it allowed them to have more success in the neutral zone and the offensive zone in game 2. Now, the first period was relatively even. Buffalo outshot the Bruins 8-7. It was kind of back and forth. No team really grabbed possession or control of the game in the first period. But in the second period, the Bruins did. The Bruins outshot Buffalo 11-8 in the second period. And I mentioned Victor Arvidsson broke the ice early on in the second with not early on, but it was in the first half of the second period to give Boston the 1-0 lead. And then it's Morgan Geekie. And for Morgan Geekie, it really is fascinating how one's fortunes can change. He obviously went 17 games near the end of the season without scoring a single goal. And he scored 5 goals in his final 4 games of the regular season. And now he's got a couple of goals in the first couple of games against Buffalo. But his most recent goal is just, it was the most fortunate bounce that you'll see in postseason hockey. And it's just funny how a guy can go nearly 20 games without scoring a goal. And then in the postseason, he can score a goal like he did in game 2 against Buffalo, where it had no business going into the back of the net. And even in game 1, Geekie had a wide open net on a great pass from Fraser Minton on the power play. And he just kind of froze and wasn't able to get the shot off at all. And that should have been a sure goal. But again, here we are in game 2, and he backhands a dump in from center ice, and it just happens to take a funny bounce and go past Pekka Luukkonen to give Boston a 2-0 lead. So definitely a fortunate bounce for Boston. There's no denying that. I mean, anybody with a pair of eyes and ears would tell you that that shot had no business going in. That said, the Bruins were the better team to that point in the game. They did have the 1-0 lead at that point in the game. And even in the third period, like, they came out, and as I said earlier, for the second game in a row, they scored on the opening shift. So the Bruins did get lucky with that Geekie goal, but they still were the better team in game 2. They generated more high danger chances at 5-on-5. They were the better team on special teams. They were 5 for 5 in the penalty kill and 1 for 5 in the power play. And, they had the shot advantage too until later in the game. The Bruins were leading Buffalo in shots, I want to say 18-16 through 40 minutes. And I think that total increased early on in the third period. Boston obviously scored early on. I want to say the Bruins had a 21, 22 to 17, 18 shot advantage by the time they made it 4-0. And once it got to 4-0 and all those scrums kind of happened and all the penalty minutes and all the misconducts, and Boston's bench was down to 4 defensemen for about 10 minutes. Buffalo put on a push in the latter half of the third period to make it 4-1 and then 4-2, and they pulled the goalie for about 4 minutes. So they piled up some shots late. So if you're looking at the box score, the Sabres did end up out shooting Boston 36-26 in this game. But as far as the shot totals, when the game was still in the balance for both teams, the Bruins were out shooting Buffalo until later on in the game when the game got kind of silly there. So another big goal in this one for Boston was Pavel Zacha. I mentioned last episode, keep an eye on Pavel Zacha because he had one playoff goal in 26 games heading into game 2. And I mentioned, hey, you're a 30-plus goal guy, a 60-plus goal guy for this team in the regular season. You have to be that guy in the postseason if you want to have success. And he did have an assist in game 1. It was in garbage time. It was a secondary assist. But here in game 2, after the geeky goal, the freak bounce geeky goal, it's still a 2-0 game. And in the dying minutes of the second period, David Pastrnak with a beautiful shot pass to Pavel Zacha in the bumper, and Zacha gets the power play goal, and it makes it 3-0. It's a huge goal because we all know what happened in game 1 when the Bruins had a 2-0 lead. They weren't able to extend it, and Buffalo crept their way back into the game and took over late in the third period. So the fact that Boston was able to give themselves a 3-goal cushion just made it that much more difficult for Buffalo to come back. And of course, they make it a 4-goal cushion in the third period, which turns out they needed because Buffalo does not go away, and they will not go away throughout this entire series. That's for damn sure. But a great night for the Bruins' second line. Pavel Zacha, obviously that was a power play goal, but Victor Arvidsson with his 2 goals at 5-on-5. And for a line that was the Bruins' most consistent and best line throughout the course of the regular season, they had a tough game 1. They were -3 as a line. But in game 2, all 3 players stepped up. Couple of goals for Arvidsson, couple of assists for Middlestad. Obviously, the power play goal by Zacha. And so I mentioned if the Bruins want to be successful in this series and in the postseason, Pavel Zacha has to continue to be a productive scorer for the Bruins. He can't go away like he has in postseasons past. And in game 2, that was a prime example of him and his line mates, showing up for Boston in a game that the Bruins, it wasn't a must win because there's that old saying, it's not a playoff series until the home team loses. Boston could have dropped game 2 and easily gotten a win in game 3 to make it 2-1, but they do get the win. They go back home, tied 1-1 with now an adjusted home ice advantage in the series. And it was a ballsy win for the Bruins. It really was. Buffalo's a hell of a team. They have a hell of a fan base, and they have a lot of speed and skill. And Boston, they were determined. They were determined in this game, and they made the proper adjustments. Let's go to head coach Marco Sturm and hear what he had to say after Boston's big game 2 win.
Marco, you talked about your team playing to its identity, but what in particular changed, or what was the biggest difference between Sunday's game and tonight's game for your team?
Yeah, no, we played more physical. I think that's something we wanted to do and get better in our forecheck, but also protecting our slot a little bit more. So again, I just being more aggressive, I would say. I think that was the big difference today.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else I mentioned last episode that needed to be better was the Bruins' fourth line. The Bruins' fourth line needed to do a better job in game 2 than they did in game 1 at really being effective on the forecheck. I mean, you're talking about Tanner Jeannot and Mark Castle. Like, those are two big boys. Those are quintessential fourth line grinders that you do not want to see coming at you on a forecheck if you're in opposition. So I do think that Corrali and Kastelik and Jeannot as a line had a better night. I felt like their impact was felt more so than it had been in game one. And sometimes it's not always in the score sheet. It's the game within the game. But I do feel like the Bruins as a team, they were more on their toes. And I do think that those defensive zone breakout adjustments were massive, because at the end of the day, if you can't get the puck out of your end, then you're not going to have a great neutral zone transition game or forecheck or extended offensive zone time game. And we saw that in game one. And to the Bruins' credit, they rectified those ailments for game two, and they were able to draw back with an even. Now, how about the Buffalo side of things? Because I mentioned earlier that there are some question marks for the Sabres. There are. They have a bit of a goalie controversy after game two, and rightfully so. I mean, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen did not have a great game. Even the geeky goal aside, which of course was an absolute backbreaker. But the Arvidsson goal wasn't great. The first Arvidsson goal was not great to give up either. You have to respect the Bruins outlet, and you have to respect Arvidsson winning that foot race and getting a quick shot off. But that's still a goal that you want your goalie to stop. It's a backhander on the ice. So there are some questions for Buffalo heading into game three. Let's hear what Lindy Ruff had to say after Buffalo wasn't able to capitalize in game two.
Lindy, how did this one get away from you? It seemed like we're at 0-0. Next thing you know, it's 4-0. How did it get away?
I thought they got a couple fortunate bounces. You look at the bounce on the goal where they're flipping it in. The airlifted one that went above us on the first goal, they got a little bit lucky on too there. I thought we started the game good. We had a couple good opportunities. I thought a lot of clutching and grabbing and trying to slow the game down. But overall, you're not going to win every game. They got the experience of playoff win. Now you experience a loss. We've been a good road team. I'm looking forward to going to Boston.
As you should, Lindy. As you should. Boston's a great city. And, you should stop by Regina's Pizza in the North End, get yourself a pie well done, and thank me later. And same goes for any Sabres fans. If you're going to Boston, you should definitely go to Regina's Pizza. And if not Regina's, because you're short on time, maybe Halftime Pizza, which is right across from the Garden. But yeah, listen, if you're Buffalo, you have to be confident heading into game three, because otherwise you've lost before you've taken the ice. You have to be confident in yourself as a team. But I do think that Lindy, for the most part, in that comment, I think he's right. I mean, obviously, the geeky goal was a fluke goal, so you can chalk that up to a fluke. But I don't totally agree with him on the Arvidsson goal that he's alluding to. As I said, I think that Pekka Luukkonen has to stop that backhander on the ice, no doubt about it. But I feel like Lindy's kind of letting his team off the hook a little bit, chalking that play up to a high lob that they're like, that's hockey, in my opinion. Like, a defenseman using the high lob, a lot of teams do that. Buffalo, I'm sure, does that when they're in trouble. And the fact that Aspro did that and Arvidsson recognized it and outraced both Buffalo defenders to the puck, I mean, that's not lucky. That's hard work. So, maybe I'm taking his comment a little too literal there, and maybe he's referring to the shot that Pekka Luukkonen gave in. But, he did mention the high lob and how that's kind of like, I don't know, that to me, that's a hockey play. And I don't, if I were, a Sabres fan or analyst right now, I'd be saying, I don't want you to let the boys off the hook there. I mean, they got out executed on that scoring play. So, but overall, yeah, I think that Lindy is, correct in the assessment that obviously the geeky goal was a killer. But it does beg the question, and I'm curious for Sabres fans who may be listening to this video, because I did notice on the last video that many Sabres fans did click to listen, and I welcome all of you. But is there a goalie problem right now for the Sabres heading into game three? Because I personally, looking at Pekka Luukkonen, he just kind of seems maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And he's had some good saves. He has had some great saves throughout this series, and he's had multiple breakaway saves too. But just looking at his face, he just seems like he's a deer in headlights. And maybe that's how he always looks. To be fair, I'm not watching Sabres games all year long, but he seems like he's a little bit deer in headlights. And I kind of compare and contrast that to Alex Lyon, who, when he came into the game in relief in game 2, he was in the game for about 10 seconds. And his first whistle, his helmet was, raised above his head, and his face mask was raised so you could see his face on TV, and he was giving it to one of the Bruins players. I think it was Tanner Jeannot. Challenging him to fight, calling him a loser, telling him to F off. Like, I don't know. I just like that intensity. I like that fire and that spirit that I saw out of Alex Lyon, if I'm a Sabres fan. And he had a great year himself, right? By all accounts, it's not necessarily your quintessential starting goalie versus backup goalie situation. They both shared the net, and Lyon played really well throughout much of this season. He may have had some hiccups towards the end, but I might go to Lyon in game 2. I don't know. For Sabres fans listening, let me know what you think about that. Maybe you give Pekka Luukkonen another opportunity here to show himself with a shorter leash. But I don't know. I'm just kind of looking at body language more so than talent, and I wouldn't mind that fire in Alex Lyon, but that's just me. If they do go Pekka Luukkonen, trust me, the Bruins fan base will be all over him, just like the Sabres fans were all over Swayman. And if he flounders under the bright lights in Boston, and maybe he has a short leash, but I'm curious what happens there. I am curious, but some other storylines to come from this game is the temperature in this series really has picked up. There's no doubt about that. You have two old Adams Division rivals that are very passionate fan bases, blue collar hockey cities. Definitely a very entertaining series so far. And I'm sure both fan bases are starting to grow hate and animosity for some players on the opposition. I know for a fact Buffalo Sabres fans are not big fans of Charlie McAvoy right now. And, I can't blame them for it. Obviously, it was a pretty questionable hit. It wasn't the worst low bridge I've ever seen, but it was definitely a bit of a low hit. On the other side of the aisle, Bruins fans, I'm sure, don't love Zach Benson crashing into Jeremy Swayman what feels like every whistle. And, I do think Sabres players have been taking a few more liberties at the whistle on Swayman than Bruins players have been taking liberties on Pekka Luukkonen. Is that fair to say? I mean, I think both fan bases, if you're watching a game objectively, that, I think the Sabres have been going to the Bruins crease a little bit more intentional, but I think it's smart. I think it's smart to try to goad the Bruins into penalties. No doubt about it. I mean, you're obviously going to protect your goaltender, and if the refs are going to, there were some. I think of the three major scrums that happened in game 2, both teams were kind of, they all were guilty as sin. Egging each other on and antagonizing each other and instigating each other, and certainly partaking in some face washings and fisticuffs. I think oftentimes like those scrums should probably go, matching on both sides. But Buffalo came out of all three of those major scrums with a power play. So if you're the Sabres, you're probably looking at it saying, "Hey, let's keep doing it." Now, the Sabres power play is another question for that team looking forward. They're 0 for 10 in the series. They're 0 for 32. Dating back to the regular season since they've last scored a power play goal. And, it is interesting to me because the Sabres, they do have a ton of talent that they can throw out there. You love the fact that Rasmus Dahlin is quarterbacking your power play. You love the fact that you have Tage Thompson and his size and skill and shot and release and creativity, on the half wall and behind the goal. And you like Jason Zucker. He is definitely a good player in the bumper. Josh Norris, good strong player. Like there's a lot of talent. So it's it's surprising that they're struggling the way that they are. But I do wonder if it's mental at this point for Buffalo. And the longer that they go without scoring a power play goal, maybe it gives the Bruins players more incentive to take some liberties with the Sabres in those scrums because, hey, you know what? We'll challenge you to score on the power play finally. And I don't think that's smart. I don't think you want to, flirt with giving teams too many chances, but it's definitely one of the questions for the Sabres heading into Game 3. Who's going to be their starting goaltender? If it is Pekka Luukkonen, how long is his leash? Can they get off their power play drought, right? And so these are some questions for Buffalo. Also, they haven't been scoring a ton in the first 2 periods of action. The Bruins, in Game 1, it took the Buffalo Sabres, 57 minutes or so to get their first goal of the game. And when they did, they came in plenty and they got the win. But then in Game 2, similar thing. There's 6 minutes to go in the game and it's 4-0 Boston. And they finally got one and then they got another one and they made it interesting. But Buffalo's having a hard time, getting past Swayman early on in these games, in the first 40 minutes of these games. So they have the benefit of their home crowd cheering them on in Buffalo to give them that boost of energy late in games. In games 1 and 2, they're not going to get that same support from the Bruins faithful at TD Garden. So if you're the Sabres, you don't want to rely on these third period comebacks too much. I know they're a great third period team in regular season, but they want to get to their game earlier. They definitely want to find the back of the net earlier. That's obvious. Everybody wants to find the back of the net as soon as possible, but it's been a theme in games 1 and 2. Boston's kept them at bay through the first 45, 50 minutes of both games 1 and game 2. Game 1, it wasn't enough to hold off Buffalo ultimately in 60 minutes, but in game 2 it was. So that's another question. And I have one more question about Buffalo heading into Game 3 that I'm curious to get the opinion of Bruins fans and Sabres fans on this alike. But first and foremost, let's go to Nikita Zadorov after the game, and he was talking about the physicality of the series and Sabres players taking some liberties on Swayman and what the Bruins' responsibility is in those moments.
Important is it when they're crashing that hard every whistle for you guys to be there to clear out the crease like you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, when I grew up, all my coaches were telling me to protect my goalie. So when somebody slashes my goalie, that's my job to step in. So I don't think they want to keep doing it. They want to keep getting it. So I mean, that's how it is.
That's how it is, Nikita says. That's how it is. Now, Nikita is one of 2 current Bruins, who are famously former Sabres. Nikita was drafted by Buffalo. It was a long time ago at this point, talking about a decade. But Casey Middlestad also was drafted, high draft pick by Buffalo. And, he spent a lot of time as a Sabre, never made the playoffs with them. But here we are, ironically, they make the playoffs for the first time in 15 years. And Casey's on the other side of it with the Bruins. Now, he's also had some stops along the way. He went to Colorado before Boston. And it's been a couple of years since he was in Buffalo. But Middlestat and Zadorov, 2 former Sabres in this series that Buffalo fans are definitely familiar with. Although it's been a long time since they cheered for Zadorov. I think it was probably 2015 or so. Is that when he was drafted? 2014. But yeah, listen, if you're Buffalo, you have to. I would keep doing it. I would keep sticking Swayman. I would keep going hard to the blue paint after whistles and try to go the Bruins into penalties and agitate them. And as long as you're willing to answer the music, but it's I don't know any team that will stand by and let the opposition take liberties on their goaltender. So it really, until the refs start calling it on Buffalo, then I think they should keep doing it. If Zach Benson goes out there in Game 3 and slashes Jeremy Swayman's glove as he's covering up the puck, and the ref calls him for a 2-minute minor slashing, and maybe then Benson will stop doing it. But until that happens, keep doing it. I mean, it's playoff hockey. It's the game within the game. So that's interesting. And Lindy Ruff was also asked about the temperature of the series rising.
Expect that
temperature in the series to kind of go up a little bit between the McAvoy hit and, you know, the Zadorov thing and things like that maybe they'll try to drag you into more of some of that?
Yeah, well, you heard he said they're bigger and more physical. So, yeah, for sure. I'm a little worried.
Okay, so Lindy obviously is talking tongue-in-cheek, and, you know, he goes on to let out a bit of a chuckle afterwards, too. So I don't want to read too much into that, but I am curious. And as I said earlier, I want to hear from Sabres fans on this too, especially because, you know, you've watched this team religiously all year long and in years past, and you know how these players and these coaches think and whatnot. But from where I sit, and again, I know Lindy was joking there, and I know he was also kind of prompted to answer about the physicality and the temperature rising in the series. But there's a small part of me that I do feel like the Sturm comments from before the series, I do think they're eating at the Sabres. I'm not saying it's going to be in a detrimental way or that it's that big of a deal. But it just feels like they took, you know, that meme, that scene from The Last Dance where Michael Jordan's being interviewed and he says, "I took that personal." You know, that's that's kind of what it feels like with the Sabres. It was very clearly, you know, minor gamesmanship from Sturm to say what he said. I don't think it was anything crazy, but I do think the Sabres took that personally and kind of as a challenge. And, you know, I think it's been evident that Buffalo has been they've definitely been trying to mix things up just like the Bruins have. They've been trying to prove that, you know, they can go toe to toe with Boston in the physicality department, as they should. It's playoff hockey. But, you know, there's been a couple of times now where Lindy's made references to Sturm's comments, and he was asked about them as well. So it's not like he's totally going out of his way to do so. But I don't know. It's just I found that comment to be funny, and again, it was tongue in cheek by Lindy. But you know, if for Sabres fans that have been watching this team all year, does it feel to you that they're going out of their way to try to prove some point that they are bigger, stronger, tougher than Boston, or at least bigger, stronger, tougher than you know, Marco Sturm may have insinuated that they were? I don't know. I just think that it's something to keep an eye on. You know, you don't want to lose, you know, any mental games. If Marco Sturm's comments are still rubbing the Sabres the wrong way, I don't know. To have it as bulletin board material for game one, sure, but you don't want to let that carry over into games 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just you got to focus on your game, play your game, and that obviously includes physicality. It's playoff hockey, but I don't know. I found that comment to be funny. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy game 3 on Thursday. As I said last episode, I will be traveling over the next week and a half, so I'll be remote, and I will try to record as much as I can. There's a fine line between enjoying vacation and defeating the purpose of it. So it's not the best timing. I know. This was planned about a year ago, and did not necessarily expect the Bruins to be in round 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs a year ago. So it is what it is. I will still be recording and keeping up on the series, but it might not be after every single game. So thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy game 3 on Thursday, and I'll talk to you soon.